listening audience. And we begin today's edition with, let's see, I'm going to bring that up for you. Quite a bit that we have going on, the African Youth Excellence, and we're going to have that interview by Shabaka Kambon. And also a feature, the Public Procurement Act, interview with Afra Raymond. Of course, you'll have your Africa report and the viewpoint afterwards. So without any further delay, let me bring in everyone. Hello and good evening. Can you hear me over here? Woo.
Indeed.
That was a little feedback there.
Hello, Karen.
Can you hear me?
Oh, Karen, I hear you.
All right. There's just a little bit of feedback coming in on my speaker.
All right. Let's, if we can adjust that tonight quickly. I'm going to just change my microphone here. I want to say a special good night to the Talk City listeners. Let's do this here quick. Okay. Hello. How are we going?
Not okay. Just about pretty much the same. See if you could just continue, and maybe it'll work itself out. As I can say.
For those YouTube, Facebook, we have a video of a young lady from Tobago who is going to take the world by storm. In fact, she's already on her way. This is Cheyenne. Let's get the pronunciation right. Let's see her in action. Cheyenne Ubeda. All right. So, for those of you who have just joined us, or joining us, I know we have a lot of loyal viewers here in Trinidad, across the Caribbean, across the world. You're viewing or listening to Indaba, the place where knowledge grows, the place to find consensus, the voice of the people, the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee, and of course, you would have just seen the video of a young lady called Cheyenne Ubeda. She is from Tobago, lives close to Mount Irving, and is now about to take the world by storm in the sport of surfing. Now, just to put this into some kind of context, if you ever think about or dream about making surfing your choice of profession or sport, it's, you don't have a lot to work with. There are about three Trinidadian surfers or Trinbagonian surfers who have been able to make a life and a living from the sport. Perhaps Jason Aparicio, Alan Davis, and Chris Dennis. And outside of that, I can't think of another name right off the bat. And so it takes a certain kind of courage and a special kind of talent to believe in yourself to be able to go onto the world stage. And we have someone with us tonight. She should be joining us any minute now. From Tobago, that young lady we just saw surfing there, who has all those things, the talent and the courage. Welcome, Shahan. Welcome to Indaba. First of all, tell us how old you are. Tell this audience how old you are. In those shots there. We're not hearing you. Can you try again? Okay. And I don't know why our audio is giving so much trouble. But I've been watching this young lady surfing since she was 7 years old. I know she started at 6, and one of there are a number of young people. We call them in surfing. We call them grommets. She is by far and away the best, a lot. And not only has she proved here in Trinidad in local competition, but she just went abroad. Just came back from Martinique and Guadeloupe, right, Cheyenne? Yeah, Martinique and Guadeloupe. And how did you do in the competitions? Did you come first, second, or third? Tell me. Show me with fingers. What did you come? What? We won 4 competitions. I think we won 4 competitions. We're having a trouble with the audio here. But she's been winning absolutely every competition that she enters. And now she to national school. I think we have to do and I'm going to ask her father to send us the information we would need to donate to her travels as she goes along. We don't want to be there celebrating her after she's achieved. We want to be able to celebrate her on the journey, to support her on the journey, so that it's a collective celebration when she does achieve. So we're going to ask for that information from her father or her mom, and when they send that to me via WhatsApp a little later in the program, I'm going to share that with you. So I want to thank Cheyenne for joining us. You got a chance to see her. Unfortunately, we couldn't hear her. Her connection was a little poor in Tobago, but we will bring you more of her story later on in the program. Now we got to turn our attention to Brother Afra Raymond. One of the leading voices in good governance and anti-corruption, not just in Trinidad and Tobago. Now he's making a name for himself across the region and indeed internationally. Brother Afra Raymond is here with us because one of the pieces of work that he's been involved in, and significant part of the work that he's been involved with for the last few years, or perhaps the last decade, that has come to fruition. The procurement law has been passed. So, Afra, you're welcoming this. I suppose this is let's start there. Let's start with the good part. This is a reason for us. You have written that this is a reason for us to celebrate. This is something you welcome.
Yes.
Start off, tell us how long have you been working on this, and why is it a reason to celebrate?
Well, it's significant and it's a reason to celebrate. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. It's significant and it's a reason to celebrate because as a fundamental principle, our independence and our liberation only has a meaning when we have control of our resources and our spaces. Okay? And the public procurement system is designed to give us a modern, effective system to have control of transactions in public money, what colloquially we call the taxpayer's dollar or our treasury. So that is the intention behind the system. And this new system even though it's been amended over the years by the current administration, will have a tremendous positive effect on those transactions in public money. The other issue of significance, Shabaka, is that the public procurement law in Trinidad and Tobago was actually written by the private sector civil society group. It was not written by government. Most laws, as you all would know, is written by government departments and government bodies and so on. This was not a case like that. We wrote this ourselves because we recognize that if we were to wait to the government, it might never happen. We wrote the law. So when the People's Partnership took power in May of 2010, we started writing that law. And we were able to deliver to them. They appointed a joint select committee to discuss public procurement law. And instead of getting into the normal tit for tat discussion, who missed what meeting, who was wrong about this date, and so on, we handed them a complete law, a draft with regulations on the 22nd of December 2010. So before they had the first meeting, we set the table and said, this is the law, this is what we're discussing. So in fact, that was a level of advocacy and advanced work that went into this. So I pause here to thank my colleagues I worked with in the JCC, in the Chamber of Commerce, in the Manufacturers Association, in the Federation of Trade Unions and NGOs, FITUN, in the TTMA, Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers, the Energy Chamber. There was a cross-section of us who worked on this to get this law passed. It's very important, and I'm thankful to Indaba and the Emancipation Support Committee for having me here this evening to discuss some of the points for listeners. I'm thankful.
Well, great. I'm glad that we start there by acknowledging all those entities and individuals who worked on this with you, Afro. And all of them, of course, are welcome. But let's talk about the actual law now, the procurement law as it stands. First of all, tell us, why is it important, before we get into the details of what has happened with what you produced in 2010 and what has actually been proclaimed?
Why is it important? It's important because what we're dealing with is a question of how we transact our public money. How we create contracts, whether they're contracts to put up buildings, whether they're contracts for roads, whether they're contracts for employment, services, garbage disposal. All of those are contracts that transact public money. And that myriad of contracts needs to be properly controlled if the public interest is going to be upheld. And the public interest is upheld not only in a value for money sense, that the cheapest tender would win. It is to do with things like quality. It is to do with things like maintenance. It is to do with things like local content and local employment. It is a myriad of things that will come to bear on the decision about giving a contract out that consumes public money. And those issues, those items will become visible because the system that is now in place is a system that is transparent, where you can see who got a contract, how much the contract was for, when was it awarded, what is the contract for. Things that at this moment in time, you really have to either have a scandal and politicians rush to put out the information, or you go to court under the Freedom of Information.
Indeed. So since independence, a lot of money, public money, has been lost because this has not been in place. Is that correct? Would you say that?
Yeah, I would say that for sure, because when George Chambers took over after Dr. Eric Williams passed away, and Chambers kept those last few budgets before PNM was ejected in December of 86. Chambers actually made the point. I think he had produced a document called Accounting for the Petrodollar. It was a two-part document that's been lodged in the Ministry of Finance and lodged in Parliament to try to explain what happened with all this money. And Chambers made a painful point to the Parliament that 2 out of every $3 was stolen or wasted. And that pattern of theft and wastage prevails up to now. So even if we talk about a relatively contemporary issue like the Piarco Airport, so the Piarco Airport contract, the one that's in the papers now with all of these different political people and the appeal and the case that was stopped and all of these things.
Yeah, if we have that law in place, we may not have that problem.
Well, no, coming to the point, that contract was for 1.6 billion. And the Director of Public Prosecutions actually told the country that $1 billion of that money was actually traced in foreign bank accounts belonging to the different contractors overseas, places that we couldn't get to the money. That was what was the root of the prosecutions. Now that proportion is two out of every $3. And that's a 1998 contract.
That's right. That's right.
So I'm just making a point that it's sort of like a piece of algebra. It proves the equation, QED. And there are also this phenomena of theft and waste is also taking place in the private sector. So it's something that all of us have to look at to improve, to get a better value for our money.
Yeah. What was the delay? Tell us about the delay because we talk about 2010. This is 2023.
Yeah.
What delayed this law? This is such an important, critical law. What delayed it all that time?
Well, the law was written in 2010. The People's Partnership did not put it in place until Act Number 1 of 2015. That was the first act they passed in 2015. Last year they were in power. The People's National Movement won the election in September 2015, and there have been literally sort of almost 8 years of delay from PNM. There were three major amendments to the law, which I wouldn't go into that now, but there were three major amendments, the last set of which in 2020 significantly diluted the law because they removed lawyers, accountants, bankers, government to government arrangements. They removed all of those things from oversight, medical expenses, and so on. And I think those are substantial. I think they are damaging exclusions. And then they passed the regulations in February of 2022 because the act actually operates through regulations. The regulations have to operationalize the act. And there was then what I have come to call a constitutional imbroglio, because what we had is that our Attorney General wrote roughly a year ago, 22nd of April last year, he wrote to the Chief Justice to ask him for a checklist of what is needed to put a new law in place, because all of the legal steps are taking place. 3 amendments, regulations passed. The Chief Justice wrote on the 25th of May, which is ironic because it's Africa Liberation Day, but there you go. We have to maintain a sense of humor and observe these things with a little wry smile sometimes. But the Chief Justice wrote on the 25th of May with a 29-page document setting out the judiciary's concerns about the law. So he went beyond what the AG asked him. The AG asked him to give a checklist of what you need to do to implement the law. And the judiciary submitted a 29-page series of what I have to call objections to the procurement law, which is way out of turn, because the time to object, the time to make criticisms and suggestions about how the law could be improved is during the legislative process. There are stages when that is actually ventilated section by section. We passed all of that already, and the judiciary is now joining the party to say the law is wrong for this reason and the law is wrong for that reason. And I objected to it, and I called it a constitutional imbroglio because they stepped out of line. And the impact of that was to delay the law for a year, because we went on the 22nd of April last year when the Attorney General wrote to the Chief Justice. It was actually proclaimed on the 26th of April this year. So it's virtually a year of delay that the country suffered. I have to put it very plainly. The country suffered. Our public interest suffered because of these delays.
And what happened with those objections? 29 pages, that sounds like a serious objections. What happened to those objections over the last year?
Well, the judiciary had 29 pages of objections, and they eventually released those. They published those on the 5th of October last year. I took it apart, and I made the point that it didn't make any sense. There was no evidence. There was no research. The Attorney General held his ground, and up to the end of January this year, he was telling the Parliament that he's put a special team to look at 19 objections from the judiciary, and he needs to make sure all of these things are cleared up before the law is passed and so on. And then on the 20th of April, because I have them under pressure in my campaigning, and I also have them in court. Tomorrow morning, I'm getting a ruling on a part of this. I have them in court over this. On the 20th of April, we get a sudden press release that the law is going to be passed, proclaimed is the word, on the 26th of April. So it begs the question, well, as Shabaka, you said so correctly, what happened to those objections? We had 29 pages of objections from the judiciary, very, very strongly worded objections. The Attorney General distilled it into 19 areas of concern. And what happened? Were they rectified, those problems with the Act? And if they were rectified, how were they rectified? Or is it that they were not rectified and they were actually quietly withdrawn by the judiciary? Because I challenged them. I said to them, there is no evidence. Put up your evidence or withdraw your submission in total. And it appears that it's been withdrawn. But I'm still asking for a statement to clarify, because I think the law is too important to our country in terms of how we transact public money, transparency, accountability, and good governance, that objections of that seriousness from officials of that level of seniority could simply be allowed to slide into oblivion. We need to get clarification. Were these objections sound? Have the concerns been addressed? Yes or no?
Or have they struck a deal, Afra?
I think that's a real.
Well, only time will tell. I know we don't want to comment. I know you're in the law, you're in the courts and so on.
I don't want to say too much about that, but it's possible. I mean, all kinds of things happen. But I just like to have a statement of clarification.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Well, when we think, let me bring in my colleagues here, Dr. Fergus and Reverend Kwame Kamau. When we think in terms of heroes in the truest sense, we always think in terms of soldiers and academics and politicians and so on. But perhaps there's a case to be made for those who work on laws like this that can protect us and protect public funds from the graft of those parties that are interested in operating in that manner. We call heroes.
I have just one quick question. There have been numerous laws in the past, good laws, but they have not been good governance. There have not been good governance based on those laws. What is there to guarantee us that there would be a difference now that these laws, I assume from you, what you have said, that is a good piece of legislation. But what guarantees there that the legislation would translate into better governance and more transparency and all that? I do not trust the government to, and it's not just the regulations, because behind the regulations, you need some kind of institutionalizing of somebody, a structure in place, maybe a tribunal or something that would ensure that violations of these laws, these regulations are pursued to the letter with due punishment. What is there to guarantee any change at all whatsoever in this particular regard?
Well, the first thing to say, Dr. Fergus, is that you're a student of history. I would say you're a teacher of history, and there is no guarantee. It is a question of what we focus on, what we work on, and the systems you put in place. Okay, so I would attempt to describe to you what was the system, what was the approach you put in place that was different to what was there before. What has existed up to now, I would have to say globally, is that we have different systems of governance where an organization is responsible for doing certain things, whether it's a financial institution, a bank, an insurance company, a utility company. And if they're caught out and they're caught in breach of the law, you could have the organization convicted and found guilty of some kind of a crime, a financial crime, an environmental crime, a breach of contract, and the company may have to pay a fine. Okay, and that is what we call the corporate veil. So in fact, none of the officials who did the actual things are actually locked up, because effectively the assumption in law is that the company, whether the company is WASA or FCB Bank, the companies who did this thing and the companies who pays the fine. Now, that is what's called the corporate veil. And what we observe about it globally is that regardless of the high fines that are charged, these companies are repeat offenders. They keep doing the same thing over and over. And therefore, what we needed to do was have a way to break with that. Because what is happening is that the state enterprises get instructions from cabinet to do things, and those things aren't always straightforward things. So we created a system in which every company that transacts public money has to appoint a biological person as a procurement officer, an actual human being with a date of birth, a first name, a last name, everything. That person is the only person in that company who has the power to award a contract. Nobody else can. That person is the only person. And if the company gets charged with a breach, the company and the procurement officer are taken to court. And all of the offenses, except for one, are custodial offenses. So in fact, we're talking about prison. Procurement officers will then be minded when they're contemplating a scheme, and I use the word scheme deliberately, when they're contemplating a scheme, to get clearance from the procurement regulator before they enter that scheme. I know I've seen something in the chat, so I'm going to stop here for now.
Welcome to tonight's Lotto Plus draw, supervised by independent auditors KPMG.
Continue, Afra. We are not on the radio now, but you continue.
Yeah. Well, does it make, yeah. If I speak now, will it come across on the radio later or something?
On YouTube. We're on Facebook and YouTube.
I see. I get you. Right. I understand. Yes. I got the point. Right. So what we're doing in terms of structure and approach, which I believe is what it is you're asking me, okay? In terms of structure and approach, what it is we're doing is we have created a situation where the person who has responsibility for signing the contract is only one person. And that person is also the person who has to go before a court. That is not an office, like how an office can have an HR manager or an HR supervisor, and it could be rotated, and this person is on leave and that person. There is one person. Okay, so that was the approach we took to get this. Obviously, what it is you're saying is important because we're dealing with a director of public prosecutions. We're dealing with a court system, and we're dealing with a number of things that are joined up, a number of parts that are joined up, yes, to get a result of convicting people who are involved in these white-collar crimes. But if you start off with the wrong structure, you only talk about a house built on sand and a house built on stone. If you start off with the wrong structure, which at the moment we have a structure that is all over the place, okay? So a board could agree a contract. But in fact, the CEO is the one who meets the contractor. But in fact, the board, if you press the board, they will tell you the minister told them to do it. And there's a whole mishmash of reasons why things happen in the state sector. And this approach is designed to eliminate that overlapping set of factors and to bring everything into some clarity.
Okay, we have limited time, so let's bring in Brother Kwame.
I want to thank you certainly for the opportunity. My question is coming from a different angle, though. Within procurement as a process, the small business, on behalf of the small business, which the African community, the African demographic in Trinidad and Tobago represents a significant amount. There are fears and concerns within the small business that with regards to the law, while it does on the one hand, even the playing field, which is wonderful, which is great for small and micro enterprises, with regards to the affordability factor, to maintain the procurement officer to do all of the things that are required within the remit of the legislation, to be, as it were, the type of company / firm that would be given that final nod. There are fears on the ground with regards to, let's call them the grassroots, that while on the one hand it fixes one problem, on the other hand, the cost of doing business is going to be increased, and some persons are just not going.
I think we've lost Kwame there, Afra.
Right. Let me try to address your point, Kwame. Two things. First of all, the companies that are trying to get contracts from the state, the business, the private sector, they don't have to have procurement officers. The only person who has to have a procurement officer is the companies that form part of the state that are actually transacting in public money. So let's be clear on that first point. Second point is that it's good because the system is an improvement for small and medium enterprises, even large ones, because what happens at the moment is this. If you have a company and you're trying to get a contract to supply, I don't know, stationery, let's just make an example. You're trying to supply stationery to government offices. You may have 50 or 60 government offices or state-related offices that you could possibly get contracts from. And the way the system is working, Before the procurement law, you would have had to fill out 50 or 60 pre-qualification forms with a copy of your NIS, your PAYE, your VAT, your insurances, your employer's liability, all of those details. You have to do that 50 and 60 times if you want to be pre-qualified with 50 or 60 state entities. This system eliminates all of that. So the Office of Procurement Regulation maintains a list, and you actually apply once. So you apply once, and you give on one occasion you give your VAT, your PAYE, and all of that stuff, and your name is on the list to supply stationery. And if you apply to the Northwest Regional, yeah, or WASA, you could just say my name is on the list, my number is so and so. It's like an ID number, like a GP number, and they can go there and look and see your stuff. So it cuts out all of that. So those are some of the features that I believe.
Streamlining,
Yes,
simplification, making it
correct.
much easier and much more user friendly. Last question to you, really quickly, is a follow up.
Sure.
Specialists like yourself, would you be conducting workshops for small and medium businesses who want to be able to have a proper handle, a proper grasp of it? There's one thing to proclaim your legislation, it's another thing altogether to massage the local industry so that they have a proper grasp of it, such that they can
Yeah.
really flow in it and really understand the trappings thereof.
Okay. I myself am busy. I don't have objection to doing it. I've done many of these sorts of shows to discuss some of the points in relation to the questions and so on. But I could tell you that the Office of Procurement Regulation in the 5 years, because they were appointed in 2018, the board was appointed in 2018, and the first 5 years just came to an end. In that 5 years, they've conducted over 325 workshops and seminars with a cross section of people in the commercial community and in the public sector about what the system means for you, what the system, and they will continue to do so. So it's the information is being broadcast by the officials who are running the system. I was one of the people who helped to write the law and lobbied for it, and I continue to lobby for a good standard. But it's really up to them now. They are being paid to do this. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I thank you for the response.
yeah. After our last question before we close up this segment here, in your article, Manufactured Consent in New Public Procurement Law, you
Yes.
end with a sentence that says that your next article in the series will deal with the damaging 2020 exemptions. Of course, we don't have time for that tonight.
Yes.
Also say that you deal with the statements of the Prime Minister at his press conference on the 9th of May. Could you give us a little sample of what you're going to be dealing with? What do you think needs to be addressed?
Well, the article actually came out Sunday gone, so it'll come out soon. It'll come out on the blog soon. But basically, the PM was claiming that lawyers, their work is so mysterious and so special that, in fact, and so important that it doesn't need to be overseen and so on. And I don't think that's correct. I think everybody needs to be overseen, and we need a degree of equality for us, for the system to have the proper impact for the benefit of the country.
Yes, well, I'm sure that the work is not done. There's more work to be done. So perhaps we could see some modifications and improvements in the future. We're going to start there for now, Afra, but we're going to ask you to join us again after the Africa report so we can dig down into the connection between corruption and crime. We want to just get your views on that.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Afra. Dr. Fergus, over to you.
Yes, so that's the word sign for welcome or hello in South African Sign Language, SASL. One other language, and most Africans from the motherland that I know communicate in multiple languages, but most of them may not have given a second thought about learning to communicate in deaf language. Sign language, however, is not peculiar to humans. Most animals use body signs to communicate exact information. I will consider just two examples. The lesser known one. Now, it is said that human dance is a form of communication, but actually human dance pales in comparison with the dance of the honeybee. Yeah, the simple little honeybee. When a honeybee finds a new source of nectar, it turns to the hive and does an intricate dance to inform the other worker bees of the source or exact location of the flowers. and that is accurate for up to about 5 kilometers. Now, I was on apiarist once, and I have seen the dance many times, so I can confirm that. The second and known example, when a dog wants to show aggression or assert dominance, it boldly raises its tail. All of us know that. If it is submissive or fearful or scared, it puts its tail down, often between its legs. But when the dog is happy, it wags its tail. Now, what I have observed is some animal behaviors seem to be incorporated into human sign language. That's my personal observation. It has not been confirmed by any experts that I'm aware of. All of the limited signs to communicate part of our own human communication on a daily basis. In other words, all of us use limited signs to communicate. But deaf communities have developed signs for every usage that speech is capable of expressing. I'm really fascinated. I hope you are when you have seen some examples. Now, speaking of deaf, sign linguists differentiate between deaf and deaf. That is uppercase and lowercase d. The uppercase D, deaf, is the community of deaf people who depend on sign to communicate, whereas the lowercase d really interact a lot and they're comfortable within speech communities. In this edition of the Africa Report, we want to congratulate South Africa for amending the constitution to include sign language as the country's 12th official language earlier this month, on the 3rd of May, actually. The purpose of the law is to promote the rights of persons who are deaf and hard of hearing. Now, because the bill required a constitutional amendment, they had private consultation, and that lasted for about a year. And the bill was finally introduced into the parliament in January. But of last week, President Ramaphosa had not yet signed the bill, but no one thinks that he won't do so. And that's my latest information that I have last week. And of course, but the country is nevertheless preparing to implement all of the legal requirements. And of course, we are hearing from AFRA, new piece of legislation, what it requires. This also requires institutions, regulations, and so on. Now, sign language, that is the spoken sign language, just like spoken language, is different in different countries. And even within a single country, there seem to be regional differences. That seems actually there are regional differences, just as we have regional dialects. Now, here is Jolie, who is an instructor for deaf language, telling us in sign of the 13 official ethnic languages of South Africa. This clip is courtesy the YouTube site Real South Africa Sign Language Stay at Home course. So, Renee, having difficulty here. In the meantime, right? So you see the languages there for our radio audience. She's saying in Ndebele, Chishonga, Iswati, Venda, isiZulu, isiXhosa, Khoisan, and ends with deaf. Now, I would say Isi in front of the languages like isiZulu, isiXhosa, because Isi really stands for language, whereas Ama and its variations would stand for the people like Amazulu. Now, standardized sign language is used in many countries around the world, but only a minority of them actually use sign language as a constitutional and human right for deaf people. And this is applicable, of course, to education, to the courts, the parliament, and in other public institutions, among other areas. South African Sign Language is complete for instruction in any subject in school at any level. And here I would give you a deaf teacher, Setuma Makopo, who is teaching mathematics and calendrics and so on, but I had to delete the number counting aspect of it because of some difficulties I was encountering that I couldn't resolve. It's a new app that I'm using. Rene, kindly play the second clip. In this sign bite, he's just saying some months of the year. The counting is eliminated. And he's saying here for the radio listeners, April, June, and July. Right, so that's the month we're in and the next 3 months that we are coming to. Now, Uganda was the second country in the world to give national recognition to sign language. And the second country was actually South Africa, just 2 years later, who was just fresh out of apartheid. Now, sign language, therefore, that is language for the deaf, is another area where Africans have shown global leadership and example in advancing human rights. Now, to date, the following African countries have legislated for national recognition of a common sign language. You have Angola, Kenya, South Africa, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. Now, from my research, I'm subject to correction. No Caribbean country, I don't know if Afro might be able to tell me otherwise, but no Caribbean country has had the courage to pass a similar legislation. And of course, we are talking about national policy, not regional institutions or sub-regions. In its strategic direction 2020-2030, the World Federation for the Deaf aims to influence all member countries of the United Nations to pass and to implement legislation to institute national sign language. The Federation claims that 80% of all recognized deaf people belong to the so-called third world or developing countries. In South Africa, there are about 600,000 certified deaf people in a population of about 61 million. So that's roughly 1%. Now, that is not a small number in absolute terms. Now, in speaking in deaf language, facial expression is very important. It's really part of the language itself. Eye-to-eye contact is very important. Now, imagine expressing your emotions and compelled to engage eyeball to eyeball every second. Shabaka, I want you to comment on that. Now, these are moments of truth. One would find it difficult to lie in such situations. Now, to conclude, I want to give you Jolie again to express some common emotions in deaf language. Rene, kindly run the final clip. She's saying for our radio audiences, she's angry, she's scared, and notice her hands down, just like the dog tail, as I said. The motivate, regret, she has regrets. She's sad now. Look at the facial expression. She's kissing someone or someone is kissing her. And that's naughty. She's saying naughty. She needs something. And of course, she may have a boyfriend or girlfriend. The same sign for boyfriend or girlfriend. Now, when you engage in education, this is something that could be challenging. You know, people with different abilities, as they say now, differently abled people. My first experience was in lecturing in Ghana when I had 2 blind students. Yes, there were blind students in my class, and I had not noticed until after several lectures when somebody brought them to me and they said, "Look, sir, you know, we don't know what you're doing, you know." And I was using PowerPoint. You know, all my lectures were based on PowerPoint. I noticed these guys were not writing at all. So subsequently, you know, I felt very badly, but we became friends. I would tell them after a lecture, come and see me in the office. So it was like, you know, doing the lecture all over again. But that really changed my perspective on dealing with seriously the challenged students like blind, deaf, and so on. And it was only when I returned to St. Augustine, I realized there were quite a few seriously challenged students, without arms. This lawyer who qualified without arms, she was there at the time, people in wheelchair, blind, and so on. So that's it for the Africa report for this week. And of course, kudos to South Africa.
Dr. Fergus. I mean, I was there in the background trying to practice those signs myself.
Yes, yes.
I will actually be going to the to do a presentation at the School for the Deaf in Cascade in the upcoming weeks. So I'm going to
Check out
take.
the site. Check out the site that I mentioned. I can send the site to you.
Okay.
Very helpful. Very helpful. Yeah.
Very, very interesting. These are things I really knew nothing about. So I appreciate the work that you're doing to bring attention to those things, Dr. Fergus, in this program. And let me use this opportunity as well to congratulate Reverend Kamau. Both he and I gave presentations in what is still Woodford Square, to be renamed. Of course, Woodford being one of the greatest white supremacists in the history of this country. And of course, as Dr. Fergus says, when we look at the colonial governors, it's kind of a parade of white supremacists. But Woodford certainly has distinguished himself in that regard, and that square has to, cannot continue to openly glorify him. But Kwame Kamau gave a stirring speech in the square. I didn't get all of it because, of course, I was sitting down in the crowd, and there were one or two brothers who sought to engage me on all kinds of subjects while Brother Kamau was speaking. But this was the anniversary of the All Mansions of Rastafari. Every year they try to hold an event there to celebrate this platform, which brings together all the various houses or sects of the Rastafarian movement to try to advance the cause of that particular movement. And so they invite various speakers from across the country, myself, Brother Kamal, Brother David Mohammed. We were all on that program. And Brother Kamal, I want to congratulate you on a stirring presentation. The kids who were around me after you were finished, they just kept repeating some of the lines you were saying. So you did have some impact. So congratulations. Anyway, in the time we have left, let's address this issue. A number of the speakers who have spoken out on the issue of crime recently, particularly the progressives, those we like to say in our camp, people like Brother David Mohammed, Dr. David Mohammed, Dr. Tahimba Salandi, and others, myself included, we've alluded to the fact that the crime at the top of our society, the crimes that are taking place at the top of the society, have a huge impact on the crimes that are taking place at the bottom of the society. And so we thought, having you on the program tonight, we could ask you, what do you think about this idea that corruption has an indirect impact on the circumstances of the masses of the people, and therefore on the crime?
Well, are you hearing me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, there are two dimensions to the thing. First of all, there's the simple fact about an example. We live in a small country. We live in a time of a media saturation. So the sort of relative mystery that existed 50, 60 years ago is no longer the case. Okay? There are a lot of resistance to the property tax. People talk about the property tax. People don't know how much property you have. And you become a target for bandits. And you don't want people to know how much money you have and so on. But that is rubbish. Because actually, the dominant characteristic of rich people in a society like ours is that they show off. Everybody know that they're rich. I don't know anybody who's rich and modest. Everybody know they're rich. They want to have the biggest house in the area. They want to drive the best car, the best watch, the best clothes, the most traveling, and you know the rest of the story. So the notion that wealth is somehow a mysterious thing that we don't understand, we're seeing it. So it's up in your face with the kind of individualism and the state of where the society has come to now. So that's the first sort of dimension of the thing. There's another dimension, which is that. So clearly, I agree with Kafra, sorry, not Kafra, but Shabaka. I'm sorry, and the points about the example. Everybody's seeing it, and it being a reflection of what are the dominant values in the society. That it's all right to do the wrong thing because you could get away with it, and who is going to do me anything, and so on and so on. The other side of it is that, in fact, at a very practical level, this is where we're going to get nitty gritty now. At a very practical level, a lot of the gun crime that besets the nation every morning. You open the papers and this person was shot and two people were shot here and so on. A lot of the gun crime. If you really sit down and think about it, the actual suspicion or the urban legend used to be that the guns came across on a boat from Venezuela in the middle of the night and so on and so on. What we heard recently from the police commissioner and from the head of customs, and Shabaka, you would know more about this than I would, is that those guns actually come into the country through the legal ports, in legal containers. They're shipped in by people. And what we also heard is that, in fact, the instruments that are supposed to detect those things, I don't know whether they call them scanners or x-ray machines. I am not trained in these things. Shabaka, again, you would know more than me. But the instruments that are supposed to screen those things, those instruments, most of them are out of order because of the contract, this, and they couldn't get parts and so on and so on. Now, I want to say to you all, as much as we deplore the gun crime, the blue-collar crime, all of that, the fact that we could have paid so many millions of dollars for an instrument and don't have a contract in place to maintain it, and don't have a contract in place to train people so they're working all the time, all of that are elements of procurement. Because procurement is about a life cycle costing. It's not just about the cost you pay in the beginning for something. What does it cost to keep tires on the car and oil in the engine and the car serviced? And the same thing with the big scanners on the port. Okay, so there's a way that these things are intimately tied together. And I want to close by saying that when we were writing this law, we were very painfully aware of the fact that a significant part of the contracts are funneled into what is colloquially called our community, CPEP and URP and special works and so on and so on. And that money is captured by those community leaders, and very minimal low quality work is done. But it funds a certain type of activity and a certain type of profile and fame, because this is about fame and ego and so on. Because I remember we talked about individualism and the stage of society, and so it funds that the same way it funds it in the upper class, living in a good area, and the children going to the good school. The same thing. So we need to actually put this thing under control. Contracts are given out on merit, and they are supervised properly, and we bring our country under control. It's a very serious connection there, Shabaka. So I know time is short. I will,
After you're talking about culture, you're talking about a culture of corruption, ineptitude, inefficiency. How do you really become so optimistic that this legislation is going to overturn this entrenched culture within the society? I mean, I have hope, but I am not optimistic.
Well, all I can say to
you have invested your time, energy, and everything in this. You have no choice but to be optimistic.
Yes.
But it's a culture we are dealing with.
Yeah, Claudius, all I can say to you,
that is so endemic. You see, I really don't see how we are going to start. I don't think the legislation is necessary to bring change. But often as we know, there is not even a statistic on white-collar crime in Trinidad, right? And you're saying we're going to start, this legislation is going to be a start. I have hope, but I'm not as optimistic.
Well, I could take you back to a longer history lesson. We don't have time, and we have to respect the chair. We have 2 more minutes.
Yes.
But in fact, I could say to you that it's such a serious problem It required a very serious approach. The law was
You
designed
have
by
2 minutes
practitioners.
radio time, but we will continue for about 10 minutes.
Sure, the law
On
was designed by practitioners. It was not designed by civil servants. It was designed by practitioners. And we know how the thing goes, and we put things in place to deal with that. Whether it will work is a question of how we pull together and focus and make this effort.
In addition to that, I just want to add that that there's a real connection between the theft of public funds and the ability of the state to deal with the challenges it has to address the things that the institutions that serve the masses of the people. Because the state constantly finds itself in a place where it cannot adequately serve the people, leaving a lot of children to fall by the wayside in very important areas, while renting large buildings, month after month, year after year, and which they're not using. Things like that, have a huge impact in the long run on the state of the country, on the levels of inequality and absolute deprivation in certain communities, which definitely have an impact on crime. I think we just need to make that point. And let's use this opportunity to say good night to our Talk City listeners. A lot of people do not use the Facebook platform, they don't use the YouTube platform, so they would now be told that Indaba is finished for them. I want to say a special good night to them. And those of you who can, please just jump across to the Emancipation Support Committee's Facebook page or its YouTube channel and continue for the next few minutes with us. But if you can't, we say good night. We bid you farewell and invite you to join us again next week, same time, same place, for another edition of Indaba, the place where knowledge grows. Good night.
let's bring in Kwame now. Kwame, yeah.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Question to our gracious guest as we look at this whole issue between the link between, so to speak, corruption and its various manifestations, inclusive of that of the spate of crime that is quite mushrooming in our nation. Now, you would know because I'm sure you follow the news and you follow the various articles and reports that are written. There is, of course, a report by, of course, Mr. Figaro in relation to the whole issue of the connection between that of those dons, those cartel bosses, those persons who are involved in the illicit drug trade and the illicit gun trade. And it is primarily based on the reports that we have now, non-Africans who are, as a matter of fact, there are no Africans at that level based on his report. We have local Syrians, we have local Chinese, we have local East Indians, no Africans at that larger level in terms of the big cartel bosses and the dons. However, to clean their money, they have to pass these, as it were, blood money benefits through the system by way of various mechanisms. Are you optimistic? Again, there's a culture of the people, there's a culture of the thing, there's what is said and there's what is done. Are you optimistic based on what you have written? If operationalized, has the capacity to bring an end to the kind of infusion of again, the laundering of money from illicit means, again, in the drug and the gun trade in Trinidad and Tobago, into our business sector, into our business in general. Do you feel optimistic that if operationalized, that this legislation can have some impact upon that? And then the follow-up question is, if that happens to the degree and the extent that you are optimistic, would that then therefore lead to what we call capital flight, in the sense that perhaps Swiss bank accounts may become a little more the port of call for persons who want to keep their monies away from the prying hands of the state and others who are interested in its whereabouts and where it comes from. Speak to us, sorry, concerning that issue.
Okay. Well, the first thing I want to say is that we have to locate the public contract within the spectrum of money laundering. And the reality is that if you are a business person and you have to approach the bank to deposit money, the one check, the one transfer that the bank does not and will not question, custom and practice globally, is a government check or government contract. A check from WASA, a check from TNTech, a check from the Diego Martin Regional Corporation. I'm just calling a few examples, okay? Because that is presumed to have this solid presence of the state behind it, rather than a check from an individual. This is why these same groups you're speaking about place a high value and an importance, although it may mystify the careless observer. Why would somebody who is deeply involved in an illegal trade, which is like the drug trade you're referring to, why would somebody who's involved in that bother in a situation that is apparently wide open to have businesses and rentals to the government and so on? Well, that's the reason why. Because those payments give you a funnel that actually you can actually have payments coming from the government that allow you to mask what it is you're doing. The answer to the question is yes. And there's no proof, because right now we're discussing a series of distant observations. It's like astronomy. We're standing on a mountain by a telescope, looking up into space. And I am saying to you that part of my calculations, as somebody's been doing this for years and years, part of my calculations is that the reason that this thing had such a strong objection from the places it had objections from, particularly the political class, from both sides, the reason this thing had such a strong objection was because of its effect and its impact on the question Brother Kamal was asking us. I'm not being immature and saying, well, it's going to work. It's bound to work. Of course we know, of course, at this point, culture is complicated, there's systems, there's betrayal, yeah? But I am saying that the reason the thing was delayed so long and it experienced that amount of hostility from those people was because they're not stupid, they may be malicious, they're not stupid.
They went
to the same schools as us, and they looked at
I want you to remember the part B, our beloved brother. Do you anticipate, as a result of that, capital flight? There has been a lot of capital flight when systems become tight. I didn't mean to rhyme there, but it happened. Do we expect capital flight out of Trinidad and Tobago and other jurisdictions who decide to go in that direction, as we saw happened in cases like Singapore and other places in the beginning of the tightening of the ship? There was a little exodus taking place. Is there that anticipation of exodus?
I think there could be capital flight. There could be, yeah. I would agree with you. That's a possibility. It hasn't been a focus of our work, but it's a possibility. I agree with you. It's a likelihood, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Shabaka, you need to unmute. We are not hearing you.
I got first point though that we have a saying in Trinidad that people don't pelt stones at trees that don't bear fruit, and I think that speaks volumes. So Afra, I think our time is up now. I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight on Indaba. And it has been a pleasure, always a pleasure. And of course, we salute you and those who worked with you to bring this historic legislation to promulgation. And we certainly will be keen to see where it goes from here. And we know you keep us posted on all the developments as it goes along.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Fergus, for the Africa report. Brother Kamal, once again, congratulations on your presentation at Woodford Square. And let me just close by thanking Cheyenne from Tobago and giving you a telephone number. Those who are interested in finding out how they could support her, you can call 263-3314. Her father's name is Gregory Ubeda. You can call his number 263-3314. She plans to attend competitions in France within the next 4 months, and of course, she will need as much support as she could get to be able to do her best on our behalf. So please call 263-3314 to support Cheyenne Ubeda, and let me say she is guaranteed to do well. She's the most outstanding young talent we have in Trinidad and Tobago, and she really deserves the support. She's worthy of that support. She works. She goes and surfs in the morning before she goes to school, and then when she leaves school in the afternoon, she's back in the water, sometimes by herself. It's the most incredible thing to see someone that tiny doing that, so invested.
How old is she?
I think she's 10 right now. She could be 11.
11. I can.
She's 11, yeah, she's 11. I've seen her surfing since she was 7, and 11 is about the correct age. My son, by contrast, is 13, and and sometimes he's still. I don't see him going out there in 8-foot swell by himself. And a lot of the other young people wouldn't do that. She's incredible, absolutely incredible. All right, okay, so guys, take care. Join us again for those of you who are on Facebook and on YouTube for another edition next week, Wednesday, same time, same place, right here. The Voice of the People, the Voice of the Emancipation Support Committee. I'm Shabaka Cambon with Dr. Claudius Fergus and Reverend Kwame Kamau. Wishing you all a good night.